In the ornate marble hall of the Palace of Nations in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, a silence fell over the room as Russian President Vladimir Putin faced the cameras. What began as a routine diplomatic meeting between Russia and Azerbaijan turned into a moment of global reckoning, one that would echo far beyond Central Asia. Putin, seated across from Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, adjusted his notes. His voice was calm, deliberate, and low, but the words that followed were anything but ordinary. For the first time since the mysterious downing of an Azerbaijani passenger jet in 2024, the Russian leader publicly acknowledged Moscow's role. He called it, in his own words, a tragedy. "I would like to begin our meeting with the most sensitive topic, the aviation tragedy that occurred in our skies," Putin said. Already during our first telephone conversation, I not only apologized for the fact that the tragedy occurred in Russian airspace, but also expressed my sincere condolences to the families of those who died. I would like to repeat all this, reiterate it, and say that we are, of course, as agreed, providing every assistance to the investigation. His tone was restrained, almost sorrowful. Yet behind those words lay the acknowledgement of something far more consequential, that Russian weaponry, even if unintentionally, had played a direct role in the deaths of over 160 people aboard that ill-fated Azerbaijani flight. For months, Moscow had deflected accusations. In Baku, investigators had hinted at radar interference. In Kyiv, officials accused Russia of reckless air defense operations near its western borders. Western intelligence had remained silent, though multiple reports had suggested Russian surface-to-air missile activity in the region on the night of the crash. Now, after nearly a year of speculation, the Russian president himself was confirming what many had suspected. The crash had not been an accident of weather or pilot error. It had been a byproduct of war. "There was a Ukrainian drone in the sky," Putin continued. "We were tracking 3 such drones, which crossed the border of the Russian Federation on the night of the tragedy." Those words were a window into the military logic that led to the catastrophe. Russian radar operators on high alert for Ukrainian incursions detected what they believed were hostile UAVs approaching from the west. Orders were issued. Missiles were launched. What followed was chaos. Putin paused before describing what Russian investigators had concluded. "The second reason," he said, "is technical malfunctions in Russia's air defense system itself. The 2 missiles that were launched did not hit the aircraft directly. If that had happened, it would have crashed on the spot. It exploded, perhaps as a self-destruction mechanism, a few meters away, somewhere around 10 meters. And so the damage was done, but mainly not by the warheads, but most likely by the debris from the missiles themselves." To the untrained ear, it was a highly technical statement, but to diplomats and defense analysts watching around the world, it was a rare moment of candor. The Russian president was describing in detail a military accident, one that occurred within Russian airspace, under Russian control, and one that directly resulted in civilian deaths from a friendly nation. For Azerbaijan, that acknowledgement was both vindication and anguish. In Baku, relatives of the victims had waited for months for transparency. Many had accused Moscow of deliberate obfuscation, citing radar data gaps and the mysterious disappearance of black box recordings that were said to have been temporarily seized by Russian security services. Today, those same families heard Putin admit, however cautiously, that Russia's own missiles were involved. The crash itself had been one of the most haunting episodes of 2024. The passenger plane, an Azerbaijani Airlines A321, had been en route from Baku to Kazan when it vanished from radar screens over southern Russia. Eyewitnesses in the Kursk region reported seeing 2 flashes in the sky, followed by falling debris. Within hours, images of burning wreckage scattered across snow-covered fields flooded social media. Initial Russian statements called it an air incident caused by possible mechanical failure. But Baku refused to accept that explanation. Now, standing side by side in Dushanbe, Putin and Aliyev faced the world. Cameras rolled. Every word mattered. For Putin, this was a delicate balance, to show remorse without admitting culpability that could trigger legal claims or international condemnation. For Aliyev, it was a diplomatic tightrope to accept Russia's apology without appearing weak before a grieving nation. The symbolism of the location was not lost on observers. Tajikistan, a former Soviet republic still closely aligned with Moscow, had become the stage for this moment of partial confession. Analysts saw it as part of Russia's broader effort to rebuild trust among post-Soviet allies after years of regional tension. Others viewed it as a pragmatic act, an acknowledgement made out of necessity, not moral clarity. Throughout the press hall, Russian and Azerbaijani journalists exchanged quick glances. Some scribbled notes, others simply stared. For years, the Kremlin had denied involvement in civilian tragedies linked to its military, from the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in 2014 to incidents in Syria and Ukraine. To hear Putin admit to a Russian technical malfunction that led to civilian deaths was in itself extraordinary. Outside, in the streets of Dushanbe, the reaction was subdued but curious. Locals gathered near television shop windows watching the live feed. In Baku, meanwhile, national broadcasters interrupted programming to air the statement. Social media platforms in Azerbaijan exploded with messages, some expressing gratitude for the acknowledgement, others anger that it had taken nearly 12 months to arrive. One commentator on Azerbaijani state television called the moment a test of sincerity. Another noted that Putin's phrasing, emphasizing self-destruction mechanisms and unintended debris, seemed crafted to limit Russia's liability. He admits the truth but not the guilt, the analyst remarked. Indeed, the diplomatic implications were immense. By confirming the presence of Ukrainian drones, Putin subtly shifted part of the blame toward Kyiv, implying that the drone's incursion had provoked the missile launch. It was a calculated move, one designed to cast Russia not as the aggressor, but as a state defending its own airspace during wartime conditions. In Washington, initial reactions were cautious. A State Department spokesperson said the admission was an important first step toward accountability, while adding that full transparency was still needed. In Brussels, the European Commission called for an independent international investigation. The United Nations Civil Aviation Authority, ICAO, confirmed it had reopened its inquiry. Inside the Kremlin, advisers reportedly debated for weeks before allowing Putin to make the statement. Intelligence sources later suggested that internal reports from Russia's defense ministry had made it impossible to sustain deniability any longer. Radar logs and missile telemetry data reportedly confirmed that 2 S-400 interceptor missiles had indeed been fired within seconds of the Azerbaijani jet entering Russian airspace. But what truly changed the calculus, analysts believe, was pressure from Azerbaijan itself. In early September, Baku had quietly threatened to suspend arms procurement contracts with Russia and to pivot toward Turkish and Israeli defense suppliers unless Moscow took responsibility. Within a month, Putin's team scheduled the Dushanbe meeting, and the acknowledgement followed. The narrative Putin presented was both confessional and defensive, an attempt to humanize a geopolitical failure while preserving Russia's military prestige. His repeated use of words like tragedy, condolences, and technical malfunction revealed an awareness of international optics. Yet to many, it also underscored the limits of Moscow's accountability. In the days following the statement, the Russian Defense Ministry issued a clarification. The missiles involved had functioned within designed parameters, but engaged under exceptional conditions. The phrase dense and bureaucratic was widely interpreted as an effort to absolve both the operators and the system itself. For President Aliyev, the encounter was diplomatically delicate. Azerbaijan, despite its strategic partnership with Turkey, still relies heavily on Russia for energy transit routes and security coordination in the Caucasus. Standing beside Putin, Aliyev nodded solemnly throughout the Russian leader's statement. When it was his turn to speak, he avoided confrontation, calling the moment a necessary act of truth. But behind closed doors, Azerbaijani officials privately expressed anger. It was too little, too late, one advisor told local reporters. Our citizens deserved this acknowledgement a year ago. The victims' families, too, were divided. Some appreciated the gesture, describing it as the first step toward closure. Others dismissed it as a political show staged for cameras. A mother of one of the victims told Azerbaijani television that hearing Putin's words brought no comfort, only pain that it took so long. In Moscow, state media coverage was tightly managed. Evening news programs highlighted Putin's expression of condolences, but omitted his detailed remarks about missile debris and air defense malfunctions. The narrative on Russian television framed the event as an example of Russian transparency and responsibility, portraying Putin as a leader willing to face uncomfortable truths. Independent Russian journalists, however, questioned the sincerity. Some noted that Putin's acknowledgement came at a time when Moscow was facing mounting international isolation over its continued operations in Ukraine. "This is not repentance, it is strategy," wrote one commentator in Novaya Gazeta Europe. "It shows that even admission can be weaponized when it serves the state's interest." Meanwhile, in Kyiv, Ukrainian officials rejected Putin's framing outright. "There were no Ukrainian drones in that area," said a spokesperson for Ukraine's military intelligence. This is another attempt to use Ukraine as a scapegoat for Russia's negligence. Western defense analysts tended to agree, noting that Ukrainian drone operations rarely extended into that region due to the density of Russian radar systems. By mid-October, international calls for accountability had grown louder. The European Parliament passed a resolution urging Russia to compensate the victims' families and share all radar and missile telemetry data with the investigation committee. Russia declined, citing national security reasons. Baku continued to press for joint technical verification, though diplomatic sources hinted that a private settlement was being quietly negotiated. As the story unfolded, Dushanbe became a symbolic venue, a reminder of how post-Soviet diplomacy often mixes contrition with control. Putin's calculated confession marked a rare crack in Moscow's wall of silence, but it also served a pragmatic purpose: to contain the political fallout before it threatened Russia's influence in the Caucasus. In the end, the truth revealed was partial, the remorse conditional. But in a world where even small admissions from powerful states are rare, the Dushanbe statement stood out as a moment when a leader, however reluctantly, acknowledged a nation's tragedy. The cameras clicked off. The meeting ended. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard of the Palace of Nations, as if to bury the echoes of what had just been said. And yet, for the families who lost loved ones in that 2024 crash, one question remained: whether acknowledgement without accountability can ever truly bring justice. I would like to begin our meeting with the most sensitive topic, the aviation tragedy that occurred in our skies. Already during our first telephone conversation, I not only apologized for the fact that the tragedy occurred in Russian airspace, but also expressed my sincere condolences to the families of those who died. I would like to repeat all this, reiterate it, and say that we are, of course, as agreed, providing every assistance to the investigation. There was a Ukrainian drone in the sky. We were tracking 3 such drones which crossed the border of the Russian Federation on the night of the tragedy. The second reason is technical malfunctions in Russia's air defense system itself. The 2 missiles that were launched did not hit the aircraft directly. If that had happened, it would have crashed on the spot. It exploded, perhaps as a self-destruction mechanism, a few meters away, somewhere around 10 meters. And so the damage was done, but mainly not by the warheads, but most likely by the debris from the missiles themselves.